Socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Quote attributed to author John Steinbeck, as told by author Ronald Wright. I'm going to say something that's going to be hard to hear. You are not famous. Statistically, you are one of the billions of people on this planet who are not famous, and will never be famous. You are, most likely, not even popular. Approximately 1% of social media accounts have over 100,000 followers, and statistically, you are not the owner of an account like that. I am not the owner of an account like that. So, now that we've established this, I'm going to ask something. Why are we making OCs like we are? Like we have a giant audience to appease? Think about it. Why? Are we, genuinely, in our heart of hearts, hoping to become popular or even famous someday? Because, statistically, that is not going to happen. I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm not saying this to crush anyone's dreams, or to say you can't do it, or to naysay people's ideas. I am saying this because I feel like I'm an insane person. Unless I'm missing something, neither you nor I are currently running a $1 billion multimedia franchise. So, why are we making art like we are? There's been this trend of the corporatization of art. Every coarse edge, every rough sketch line, every slight imperfection has been sanded down, blemished out, and buffed away until the only thing that remains is something sanitized and soulless. Something meant to appeal to the widest margin of people, to avoid challenging them, and to monetize and maximize profit for the IP owners. And with the recent onslaught of AI slop and the AI boom in general, art and creativity has never felt less valued and more important. So why? Why are we, as creatives, holding ourselves to the same draconian S&P practices of a mouse-eared corporation? Why are we creating for the masses when we ourselves are one of them? Why is popularity and recognition the final and only metric we judge a work's worth by? This is a long, embarrassing soapbox of a way to say, everyone get more cringe right now! The fear of authenticity is real, and the only way to combat it in creative spaces is to get more self-indulgent, more cringe, and more edgy. We have become so afraid of making Mary Sue's that we've forgotten why they ever existed in the first place. They weren't created because people didn't know how to write. They were created because people loved imagining themselves in stories. Somewhere along the way, we as creatives subconsciously internalized that if we want our art to be celebrated, then we have to be marketable. We have to provide and prove our worth to an employer when, in reality, a majority of us will never work and will never breadwin in creative fields. Most of us are never going to pitch to Netflix. Most of us are never going to draw Batman for DC Comics. Most of us are never going to get hired by Riot Games. And that's okay. We will remain amateurs, and isn't that a beautiful thing? We answer to no one, we create on a whim, and we can do whatever we want with our worlds and stories. Art is not capital. It's not a talent held only by the gifted few. It's a skill only by the barest of technical definitions. Art, first and foremost, is a thing humans do. And now comes the part where I transition from talking about the core discussion of the video and applying it to StarSwallower. StarSwallower is this hypothetical JRPG/visual novel that I'm developing. This whole channel is dedicated to it. The story of StarSwallower, the short of it at least, is that there's a world called Feralis, and at the center of the planet is this solid gem core of magic called the Star. Our main character is Neo, and she's a recent graduate of a magic school. She and her class go to the center of the world to get superpowers called star gifts, but oops, Neo absorbs the entire star into herself. She eated it. This accidentally releases the dark mage Eon, who had been trapped inside the star, and now Neo and her friends are on the run from both Eon and the rest of the world who want the star put back in its proper place. But wait, there's a twist. That whole story is written by a girl named Vixie, who's a lonely teenager in a normal world. She uses the story of StarSwallower as a way to cope with the stress she's under as a teen with no friends, reflecting her life through her art. The choices you make while playing as Vixie in the visual novel portion will in turn affect the JRPG portion of the game where you play as Neo. Got all that? No? Then go watch this video up here. I explain all of this in intense detail, and hey, shill, drop a like and subscribe while you're at it. So, from that description alone, can you tell why this topic is something I'm so heated about? StarSwallower is a love letter to unfettered creativity and amateur creation, to the true love of the craft. Vixie writes her story for an audience of one, and every aspect of it I try to make as true to the experience of being a lonely, head-in-the-clouds kid as possible. This means if I want to stay true to the experience I'm trying to portray, I cannot allow myself to sanitize the experience and make it more palatable for a hypothetical audience I most likely will never have. I have the express duty, and dare I say the privilege, of making my characters for StarSwallower as cringe and as edgy as possible. Which brings us to Sebastian. Sebastian is one of the party members you can recruit in StarSwallower, and his whole character theme is built around this idea of self-indulgent edginess. He's this tormented butt monkey character who suffers always and looks cool while doing it, because, obviously, Vixie is working through some stuff. She projects all of her feelings of isolation, loneliness, and neglect onto him as a way of self-indulgent coping. And I tried to make this come across in his backstory, his personality and relationships with the other characters, and his role in the story, without making him all edge, no point, pizza cutter, ow the edge. Who's an edgy boy? You are. You're so edgy. Edgy. You know what I mean? Let me explain. So, Sebastian's defining characteristic is his star gift, and the great suffering it's caused him throughout his life. Sebastian's backstory is that he comes from a noble legacy of mages, descended from the illustrious Saint Celine herself. If you remember this video, Saint Celine was the saint who founded the original sainthood and invented the spell that protects acolytes when they approach the star. She's very important, and her legacy extends even into the modern era, with her current descendants living like lordly nobility in an aristocratic lifestyle. As the only son of the direct line of Saint Celine, so it was for Sebastian. He lived with every creature comfort and received private tutoring in magic, but his rich life was not a paradise. He always felt the pressure of upholding his family's legacy, and his parents made it utmost clear that if he failed, he wasn't just failing them. He was failing the entire Saint Celine name. So, not a great environment to grow up in. It was very much a world of conditional love and acceptance only when it was earned. Everything was transactional in a way that's insidiously damaging and causes resentment to build and fester until it explodes into enactments of abuse or revenge. Fortunately, however, Sebastian was always an adept mage, so he avoided the worst of his parents' abuse, for the most part. But everything changed when he made his pilgrimage to the center of the world to see the star and receive his star gift. Sebastian was privately guided to the star by the best procession of guards and guides legacy and money could buy. And when he approached the star and bathed in its light, he was empowered like no member of his house had ever been before. So, star gifts are usually single powers, or powers that otherwise stick to a single cohesive theme, right? Things like controlling the weather, which is Skylar's power, or otherwise typical single superpowers like pyrokinesis or hydromancy or something like that. When Sebastian received his star gift from the star's light, he didn't just receive one power. Oh no. he received an entire buffet of abilities. Super strength, super speed, heightened senses and agility, fast regeneration and healing, the ability to turn invisible, a hypnotic gaze that bewitches and mind controls those who stare into his eyes. And, of course, he's a bat, so he can fly, too. Sebastian was the most powerful magic user his family had ever seen, and a true testament to his lineage. Then, the true cost of his power became apparent. There's a reason why mages only ever seem to manifest one power. It's because that's all the magic a furry's body can sustain. If you have too many powers, your body does not have enough inherent magic to support all of them, so you would constantly be running at a deficit, boiling an empty pot. Eventually, you burn out, your body capitalizing on any kind of energy it can take in order to fuel your powers. So, guess what happened to Sebastian with his buffet of powers? Sebastian got sick. Really sick. He was weak and sickly and basically confined to his room, and in response to the suffering of their only son and heir, his family all but abandoned him and treated his sickness like a scandal. The only thing that granted him relief was moonlight, because of the lunar affinity of his magic, and the magic boost he received from eating star fragments. Now, usually, eating star fragments is a very dangerous way to receive a temporary magic boost, because it risks overloading your system with too much magic. But for Sebastian, who had too little magic to go around, the star fragments basically upped his ambient magic levels to the point where they were normalized. This meant he could not function without taking star fragments like they were medication, and even then, the star fragments were a temporary relief, not a cure. All of his energy went into keeping up appearances for his family, playing the part of the genius heir who wasn't at all a disgrace to his line due to his sickliness. Things had reached a hesitant equilibrium, but then the star vanished, swallowed by Neo, and the supply of star fragments began to dry up. Sebastian became confined to his room again, sick and weak as his body's magic slowly devoured him from the inside out. He was left for dead, a miserable failure as his parents try to save face over the shame of their worthless son. Which is how Neo, Skylar, and Emmeline find him, abandoned, shamed, and utterly wrecked. Neo and her friends had come to Sebastian's family manor as part of their journey, and when they find out what's going on, they immediately try to help. Through shenanigans, they learn that Sebastian can sustain himself by absorbing the essence and energy of a powerful mage. And how does he do that? Well, by drinking their blood. Naturally. And the thing that touches him, that makes him realize exactly how bad he has it, is when this is discovered, Neo and Skylar both offer themselves to sustain him, freely and willingly. No one had ever done that for him before, at least not without some ulterior motive or expecting something in return. Sebastian ends up joining the party when Neo and her friends convince him to run away, both in order to help find a cure for his condition and to escape his parents who locked him away like this in the first place. A great battle ensues as the party stages a daring escape of Sebastian's childhood manor, culminating in Sebastian having to face down his parents in a final confrontation. He's forced to choose: abandon his legacy and all the expectations that came with it, or betray his new friends and finally earn his honor in the eyes of his lineage. And after experiencing true kindness and community for the first time, he chooses. Decisively. I have this really fun idea for the boss fight for Sebastian's level. So, obviously, the final bosses of Sebastian's recruitment level are his parents. And you're finally fighting with a full party, so there's going to be a difficulty jump. And imagine, after a grueling fight, with taunting and temptation and outright berating of your new party member and friend, when you finally have his parents in a weakened state and at an advantage in the battle, control of Sebastian is taken away from the player, and he unloads his special move on his parents, dealing astronomical damage as all of his pent-up resentment and rage is released. His parents lie dead, he's free, and in the aftermath, he laughs, tears streaking down his face. Edgy. Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here, don't we? When writing Sebastian's backstory, I wanted to try and include every edgy cliche I could think of. Suffering because of incredible power? Check. Horrible childhood and abusive parents? Check. Killing his parents in an act of revenge? Big check. I was being self-indulgent, not just for me, but for Vixie specifically. Remember, Sebastian isn't just an OC, he's Vixie's OC, and she copes with her life through her fantasy. Vixie can't tell the people who overlook her exactly how invisible she feels. Sebastian, meanwhile, shouts it from the rooftops in an anguished wail. Vixie can't scream at her parents or the other adults in her life without consequence. Sebastian can outright kill the ones in his who hurt him. Sebastian gets to do everything Vixie wishes she could, and Vixie needs a character like Sebastian to vent through, to take all her dark feelings and make them tangible in order to feel catharsis. And I think there's something very powerful in that, something that I was getting at before with my discussion of recognition and expectations. Vixie is authentic because she has no other way to be. And authenticity, I think, is one of the first things left on the cutting room floor when we stop creating for ourselves and start creating for what we think a hypothetical audience wants to see. Authenticity is the soul of amateur art. It is a luxury to be self-indulgent and to create strictly from the heart, to create what we want to see, whether that be a 5 million series crossover, or a wish fulfillment Mary Sue self-ship, or an edgy bat boy who's had every toxic hardship thrown at him and still comes out swinging his scythe at those who wronged him. So, why are we making OCs like we already have millions of fans to satisfy? We don't. Most of us never will, and that means we have the incredible privilege of making art for ourselves first. Make your Mary Sue. Make your 5 million series crossover. Make your self-insert. Make the thing that 15-year-old you would have thought was the coolest thing ever. Because if amateur artists don't have the permission to be self-indulgent, who does? But what about you? Have you ever found yourself dreaming of fame or creating for a phantom audience at the expense of your own enjoyment? Tell me all about it in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. And thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me talk all the way to the end. If you liked hearing me yap about this OC project, leave a like and subscribe so you can see me again. I leave you with the completed art from today's speed paint. Bye!